Have you ever had a problem that manifests itself with a different problem and you just can't quite seem to get to the bottom of it? If you have, let us know in the comments what yours was and how you ended up figuring it out. We spent most of 2023 race season chasing one of those type of problems.
Here we are at Red Hill, Illinois, getting ready to qualify with the All-Star Circuit of Champions. And this is the start of our goose chase. Headed out to qualify, the car had developed a vibration that I could feel in hot laps, and it was only getting worse. So you can ride along with me while I hope that it hangs on for 2 laps. Qualified 10th out of 27. Unfortunately, my leg was about to take a turn for the worst.
We gotta see if they'll let us out.
Back at home, this was Ashley's first sign that there was trouble, as they stopped qualifying so we could get out back to change our rear end. Red Hill was a Sunday night show, so the All-Stars were in a hurry-up program, and changing a rear end is no small feat, even for a professional team. Unfortunately, we didn't get it done in time to take our spot in the heat race, so we got the luxury of starting the B main from the pole as the fastest qualified car not yet in the main event.
On the pole, sponsoring USA B main from Colorado Springs, Colorado, Atlantic Committee Diamond Equipment, Dirt Perfect, Skills USA number 77, Geoff Dodge.
Here we've just pushed off for the B main, hoping that the car is all put back together right, because our team had never changed a rear end together as a unit, let alone under a time crunch trying to make it out for another race. It's not a real easy feeling when you got to go flat out in a race car that you're not 100% sure is right, but Nick Bussell, Charlie Dana, my dad, and a little help from Dirt Perfect and Man Behind the Scenes, we managed to get the rear swapped and out for the B, and I felt like I owed it to those guys to get the thing in the show. We'll go green at the chalk line here, so for better or worse, it's time to let her rip. One of the major challenges of having problems and thrashing on your race car is the dirt track changes drastically through the racing program. We hadn't looked at the racetrack, no less made any changes to our car to make it better, so I've just grabbed some wing in order to try to get a little bit more rear grip. Slide the wing back and you get more pressure on the back of the car from the top wing. Vibration was gone, so I thought we had solved our problem. Unfortunately, at the next race at Paragon, Indiana, the vibration was back. Between the first and the second night at Paragon, we changed a U-joint and the vibration was gone again. Went to the high-limit sprint car race at Kokomo, Indiana a couple days later and didn't have any issues there with the driveline. The next event we went to was in Tri-City, Michigan, again with the All-Stars, and in the feature, we had a vibration come and lost a rear caliper. The following night, we changed rears, went to Butler, Michigan, and lost a rear caliper again. So we had the guys from Willwood Engineering, the manufacturer of our brakes, over to tell me what I was doing wrong. They couldn't find anything wrong with our brake setup, and so we set it off with a brand new car to go to Charlotte, North Carolina for the World of Outlaws World Finals. On the first night, we lost another inboard brake. Frustrated, I had an older brake from an older, heavier brake, that we put on the car for the second night, figuring that it must be a brake issue. And that one broke the brake pads. So we ended up putting a different master cylinder in the car, changed the brake pedal to a different ratio. We took the dry brakes off the car, and a Hail Mary that something funky was going on that I'd never seen before in my career. And on the last night of the World Finals, we lost another inboard caliper. That was the end of our 2023 race season. And let's head back to the shop here, and I'll show you a little bit more of what we had going on, as well as how the brake setup goes on a sprint car rear end.
We had a persistent problem where we would break the studs on our inboard brake mount and throw the caliper off the car. But it wasn't related to brakes at all. We're getting ready tonight to get this rear end reassembled, get a brake on it. We've changed our driveline to a ball style driveline, which is what this coupler is. So this rear just got gone through and updated to the ball spline. And so gonna show you what goes into getting a sprint car rear together and ready to go in the car, and show you a little bit more about what our problem was. All right, we'll show you what we've been running. This is one of our older rears. All of them were the same. This is called an internal coupler. So there's basically a shaft that runs from here back. This is the shifter that puts it in or out of gear. A pair of quick change gears in the back, ring and pinion. So there's not much to the rear. And this coupler sits in the snout of the rear end. It's got 10 splines. Here is a standard 1610 drive shaft that you would run with a coupler like that. You got 16 on the U-joint end, 10 on the rear end, and it fits in here like so. This drive shaft's a little mucked up because it is the one that we ran. So that sits in there like that. And then this is the U-joint that bolts on the back of the crank for the engine. If you look down in there, you might be able to see there's a little spring. And this guy sits on there like that. So that's pretty much the anatomy of a standard sprint car driveline. Now, when the engine cranks and turns and torques all this, the drive shaft will actually try to push this way, which is what that spring is in there for, to push it back. You can see the U-joints on the spring there. And what we had happening was the U-joint inside the torque tube was twisting and the driveline was whipping like a jump rope. And you can see here where it was hitting the torque tube, and you can even see here on the U-joint where it was touching the torque tube. And as a result, you can see it was riding out on the very end of the drive shaft and just chewing those splines up. And it'll be hard to see, but it also chews this coupler up. And you get a horrible vibration. You can't always feel it when it first starts until it gets worse and it actually starts hitting the torque tube. Then you can feel it a bunch. And it was actually rattling the studs out of our radial mount for the brakes. And when those backed out a little bit, it would shear the studs off and spit the brake off the car. So this is the inboard brake setup on our sprint car. You've got a radial mount that mounts to the rear end. You've got the caliper that mounts to the radial mount on the car. Let's see if I can get it to stand up here. There's a cap in the end of it. This radial mount slides through here, like so, to bolt the caliper to the rear end. You've got a splined hub that mounts to the axle. You got a rotor plate, and for us, we run a scallop stainless rotor. It's pretty lightweight. This whole setup's pretty lightweight, but 2023, we broke like 5 of these. We'd shear these studs off just below the surface, and it was really, really frustrating because anytime we'd get going good, we'd break the brakes. So the first step of assembling a brake is we got to mount the rotor to the rotor plate. It's a floating rotor plate, so the rotor can float on it. It uses these little T-nuts to mount up on there. So I'll show you how these go together. So now that I got all of my T-nuts and bolts in there, I'll show you how this rotor floats. So this guy allows this rotor to grow as it gets hot and not distort. And it also gives it a little bit of float, which helps you to have a little bit better pedal and a little more grab. So now, one by one, I'm going to take these guys out. Use some Permatex red thread locker on those and torque them to 220 inch-pounds. All right, so now we've got all of our bolts in there, finger tight. We got to torque it to 220 inch-pounds. This torque wrench is in foot-pounds, so you take 220 divided by 12, because you got 220 inch-pounds divided by 12 inches in a foot, and that will convert it to foot-pounds. It comes out to 18.5. We're going to go ahead and torque to 19. We go in a crossing pattern so that we're bringing everything down nice and even and we don't get it cocked sideways or something stupid. Click. Always take the torque off your torque wrench before you put it away. So the next thing we got to do is we got to safety wire these bolts. This is safety wire 032, so it's 0.032. This is a safety wire pliers. So they basically pinch the wire, pull that back and it'll grab it, and then they spin to twist the wire. So we'll start with our first bolt here. And if this bolt was going to come out, it would spin this way. So we want to tie this bolt so that as it tries to turn this way, it's trying to tighten this bolt and vice versa. Next step, we're going to install the studs that hold the torque tube on and the studs that hold the radial mount on. We got some brand new Fatco titanium torque tube studs, some sweet tie jet nuts to go with it, and then I've been studying my radial mount because they say that that'll hold it better than the bolts. And given the problems we've had, granted we were still losing brake calipers with the studs last year, we were doing everything we could to keep them on. Gonna try a new product on my studs today. It is the Permatex orange thread locker. Permatex came out with this. It is supposed to be the holding power closer to a red and the disassembly properties closer to a blue. So to me, this stuff sounds like made for motorsports, because we definitely don't want our stuff coming loose, but at the same time, we take it apart pretty frequently. And like this rear end housing's magnesium, so it doesn't happen often, but have definitely seen it where you go to pull something that you've red Loctited in there out and the threads come right with it. So looking forward to checking out the orange and seeing how it does. So we got our torque tube studs in here. I mentioned the torque tube. This is the torque tube. You can see where the U-joint rubbed there and that drive line was whipping like a jump in there. And this guy bolts down on the rear end like that, and then it slides into this ball assembly. This is the motor plate, bell housing. There's my gas pedal, but it slides into this tube, and that plate mounts right here, and that's the rear motor plate. So when I mentioned the torque tube, that's where it goes. The drive shaft runs through the middle. Show you how I'm going to install these next studs after I get these nuts screwed on. They're pretty sweet. Not only are they 12-point jet nuts, but they're titanium and they like weigh nothing. So just get these guys threaded on there so they don't wander off in the shop while we wait to install this rear, hopefully soon. Got some work we're going to do on the car in the meantime, but anyway, these next studs are for the radial mount, and they don't have a hex on the end of them because I cut them off and they're still a little too long. But anyway, these guys go under there, and so I'm going to use the double nut method to install these. I'll show you how that works. Call me paranoid, we're going back to the tried and trusty Permatex Red because I have trauma from the last year of brake stuff coming apart. We'll try the orange out on something that I'm not too worried about. So the double nut method, you thread one nut on, and I'm going to use my drill here to spin her on there a little bit. Guess I needed to grab the 11/16, not the 5/8. So, double nut method, you're going to tighten these two nuts up against each other. Pretty tight, but not so much you stretch the threads. And then I'm going to run them down with the handy dandy 3/8 impact. Get them snugged. crank them home with a wrench. That allows you to tighten them. Then bust your nuts loose, take them off, and you've got that stud set. Do the other side now. Just a little dab of red on there. Doesn't take much. Get her started. Now comes the radial mount. This is what the brake caliper goes on. I don't remember those being quite that freaking dab of red, dab of red. All right. Need to trim those down some more, maybe. All right, so the next thing we gotta do is we gotta put our rotor mounting hub on. So it splits in half. Assemble it here. Slide it up onto the splines. Can be a little bit of tricky one to get seated up on there just right. There she goes. Eyeball it in a little bit. We'll do another dab of orange on the nuts that mount it. And I'll wait to tighten this because we'll have to center the rotor up before we do. This is like a little bit of a, you got to go back and forth and kind of make your parts work. Pop all these guys off. Take our rotor. Slide her up on the hub. Now, we'll snug this guy on there. Now, we're going to slide our caliper on. I'm going to just put 3 of these shims on each side. 3 shims. And the caliper. Dab a Permatex orange on these jet nuts. 2 aluminum spacers. Spacer, washer, jet nut. Spacer, washer, jet nut. The next thing we got to do is we got to make sure that this rotor is right in the center of the caliper. So we got there and there. Slide her over a little bit, wiggle it around, try to make sure it's true. Now we got to take these guys loose and tighten the clamp first. I can get this dude in there. Apologize if I'm making you sick. So I've got my feeler gauge. I'm gonna figure out what stack of feelers just barely fit in there. Check both sides. It's a floater, so kind of have to go by feel. That's if I take all the float out. I think I'm a tick tight on this side. So we will see if we can knock her over a little. Alright, that's pretty close. Check it one last time to make sure I didn't move it too much, tightening it. Pretty snug there. Pretty snug there. I call that good. Give her the old eyeball to make sure we like how it looks. I think we're good. So now we'll torque everything down. 140 inch-pounds here. I have my inch-pound torque wrench tonight, so we don't have to convert. And now the rest of the hub nuts over here. So now we're going to torque down the rest of these nuts for the hub. We're still at 140 inch-pounds. And just torque them all home. All right, so now throw a brake line and a dry brake on this. All right, show you this, it's dry brake. So what this does is allows us to push it and twist it and it comes apart and it's sealed up there. So it allows you to disconnect a line without letting theoretically any air into it. I think the reality is it doesn't let much air into it, but it allows you to disconnect the line. So if we're changing out something that connects to the brakes, like the rear end or the front end, we can pop it apart, throw another one in, plug it back together, and at least in theory, you'll still have brakes. You won't have introduced air to the system. So I run their pair. They've got like a -3 A and N end on both. And so I run the opposite one on the front and the back. So like one pair does the car. And I believe I run the male on the car for the back, the female on the car for the front. And then you have the opposite for the front and rear ends. That just lets you get basically a little bit more out of a pair of them, so you don't have to buy extra males or females. So for the rear end, we'll go ahead and hook the female end to the brake line. And then attach our brake line to the car. Tighten up the brake line on the caliper. So that's pretty much the assembly of a rear. I'm a little out of practice because it's been, you know, a couple months since I've done one, but we did like a lot in a row to end the season. We went to Tri-City, Michigan, broke a radial mount, chucked a brake. The next night we changed rears at Butler, Michigan, broke a radial mount, chucked a brake. Then we went to Charlotte for the World Finals. First night, broke a radial mount, chucked a brake. Second night, we put on a different caliper because I really couldn't believe that it wasn't brake related. So we put this guy on, this Brakeman. It's like a stainless steel caliper. It's still filthy from Charlotte. And it actually shook and broke the tabs off the end of the brake pad ears. And that was when I knew it might not be a problem. We also took the dry brakes off, changed the master cylinder. We changed everything looking for our problem. And basically by the end of the weekend deduced that it had to be something in the driveline because that was just the only explanation. So obviously we haven't run the ball spline yet. Hopefully that's it, because we definitely identified that we have driveline damage now, and saw what was happening in there, it was just hard for me to believe that the thing would shake and rattle enough to rattle those studs loose and shear them off. But we found it also took out the snout bearing and a few other things. So I feel pretty confident that we're getting to the bottom of it. And hopefully we can get rocking and rolling this year without bad vibes and no brakes. Thanks for checking this out. Hope there was something that you found informative. Be sure to subscribe to our channel if you want to see our new releases as they come out. And hope you enjoyed the video. Thanks for watching.